welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mideles, and I am your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of deep South Texas. Got a very good program lined up for you today. Our El Paso correspondent Julian Resendez is going to join us a little later in the program, talk a couple things, but mostly about weapons and what the country of Mexico is doing to help prevent them from making their way up towards the border. We're also going to speak to our South Texas correspondent Sandra Sanchez on a big problem with, or rather a big issue, hopefully being resolved with a local sugar mill. One of 3 sugar mills in the country actually shut down here in the Rio Grande Valley, and a lot of it has to do with that debt that Mexico owes us with water, so we're going to speak about that in just a little bit. But first, let's take a look at some of the things making headlines across the border, starting with Portland, Oregon being the next city on President Trump's list to deploy federal troops to help apply his immigration policy. Now, 200 members of the Oregon National Guard are being placed under federal control and deployed to protect immigration enforcement officers and government facilities. But Governor Tina Kotek, a Democrat, said over the weekend that the city does not need the National Guard to help ICE agents protect immigration detention centers. She said in her conversations with the president and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem that she told them she was adamant that Oregon and Portland can handle their own public safety needs. She added, quote, "There is no insurrection, there is no threat to national security, and there is no need for military troops in our major city."
I believe the president does not have the authority to deploy federal troops on state soil. I'm coordinating with Attorney General Dan Rayfield to see if any response is necessary, and we will be prepared to respond if we have to. Oregon has not requested any federal assistance, and nor do we need it.
Now, the president suggested that the city is under siege and said he ordered the Defense Department to, quote, "provide troops to protect war-ravaged Portland and any ICE facilities under siege from attack by Antifa and other domestic terrorists," end quote. Memphis is also preparing for the arrival of additional federal authorities, including immigration and drug enforcement agents, and they're expected to arrive this week. Moving up to Chicago, or over to Chicago, I should say, armed federal immigration agents patrolled several of downtown Chicago's busiest tourist areas on Sunday afternoon, drawing criticism from immigration rights activists and city officials. Now, reporters from our sister station, WGN-TV, said agents in full uniform while Border Patrol agents patrolled the Chicago River nearby. It's been dubbed a Midway Blitz by DHS, and the patrols are led by a chief Border Patrol agent. Some people could be heard yelling at the agents as they walked by, telling them to go home. Others pulled their cell phones out to record what they were witnessing. The closest border to Chicago is 500 miles away, and police say crime in the city is down 13%. The governor is expected to address the federal presence at a news conference in about a half an hour from now. Time now to bring in our South Texas correspondent, Sandra Sanchez, to talk about something we mentioned at the top there, that sugar mill closing here in the Rio Grande Valley. It closed last year, Sandra, but can you kind of bring us up to speed on everything that's happened between then and now?
Yeah. Hey, Rudy. So in February of 2024, the only sugar mill in the state of Texas, the Santa Rosa sugar mill, shut down because there wasn't enough water here in the Rio Grande Valley for sugar farmers to grow these thirsty crops. You'll see some of this footage that our photographers here at KVO shot this morning of the sugar mill. You know, it took with it estimates of about 1,700 mill jobs and then upwards of 3,000 jobs in the entire region when you're talking farmers and agriculture workers also. But now Texas Agriculture Secretary Sid Miller says that the 3 companies have gotten together and they're hatched a deal to form something called the Santa Rosa Sugar LLC, which would in effect reopen the sugar mill by next year and eventually allow raw sugar to be brought in from farmers and produced like it had been for 51 years before it was shuttered. Under this deal, there's a company from Dallas, one from Birmingham, Alabama, and one from Charlotte, North Carolina. The 3 would participate to reopen this much needed facility. Like I said, it's only one of 3 in the entire United States. Initially, they would just refine sugar that's brought here. That would include commercial and retail sugar, even powdered sugar. But eventually, they'll bring in the crops that had been kind of the basis for this facility for so many years and jobs that so many people had relied on.
Well, I was going to ask because, it's great that it's reopening. It's great that this is going to bring some of those jobs back, but it's not actually like the full deal, is it, right? Because it's not sugar cane being grown here in this area.
Not yet, because so those crops faltered because the lack of water. And just to kind of repeat, and we've talked about this on many shows, under a 1944 international treaty between the United States and Mexico, Mexico is in a 5-year cycle to pay the United States 1.75 million acre feet of water. So what's an acre foot? If you took a square acre of land and you flooded it 1 foot high of water to about your knee, that's an acre foot. It's about 1 acre foot would fill maybe 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools, más o menos, right? So, but they're supposed to pay us 1.75 million, and they haven't. They haven't even paid us quite 800,000 acre feet so far. And the 5-year cycle ends on October 25th. So we're less than a month from the deadline. Mexico has paid some in the past 6 months under the Trump administration. We talked about this. President Trump actually withheld the United States sending some water to Mexico via the Colorado River. And then suddenly Mexico was able to pay us a little bit through the Rio Grande, but not all that we need. So, the farmers shut down. It was not sustainable anymore. But we are actually today going to speak with the chairman of the Sugar Growers Association, and he indicated to me on the phone that there are some long-term water solutions that they're looking at, and they believe that this can be viable going forward.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sandra. Sandra Sanchez, our South Texas correspondent. I want to bring in El Paso correspondent Julian Resendez now. And Julian, you're kind of following this water debt. Tell us a little bit about what you've been learning.
Really good to be back on the show. Recently I did talk to some high-ranking Mexican officials about this, and what they're saying is that, number one, there's no water to pay the U.S. Mexico and the U.S., the entire Southwest, has been in a prolonged drought for a long, long time. So reservoirs on both sides of the border are lower than usual. In Mexico, for various factors that I'll elaborate on in a second, they're lower. They have less water than U.S. reservoirs. Now, what's happened 5 years ago when Mexico was unable to meet its debt, it just transferred the water that it had in U.S. reservoirs to the United States. This is likely to happen again, except that, like I said, there's less water on reservoirs on both sides of the border, hence there's less water on reservoirs in the U.S. side as well. What the recurring theme that I hear from Mexico, apart from the drought, is climate change. Climate change that is bringing on a new normal of drought conditions, less rain than before, hence they don't have the water to pay the U.S. In my conversations with them, they say that they're concerned, and both sides of the border, officials on both sides of the border appear to agree that what needs to be done is to rework the 1944 treaty, because a lot of things have changed, both in the dynamics of water use in both countries, as well as in the rainfall and evaporation. So they need that the U.S. They say that the U.S. and Mexico need to sit down on the table, negotiating table, and come up with a new agreement that takes these new realities into account.
Now, I have to ask, Julian, up in your part of the border, El Paso, as you can see here, a major economic impact on us here, the lack of water. We just lost this multi-million-dollar industry that really impacts the entire country, one of 3 sugar mills in the United States. How is the lack of water impacting the folks over in your area of responsibility out by El Paso and in New Mexico?
Well, let me tell you about the dynamics of the treaty. For the most part, Mexico sends water to the U.S. In your neck of the woods. Mm-hmm. For the most part, we send water to Mexico in our neck of the woods. Mm-hmm. I haven't heard of any major impact on farming because our farming here is a lot more limited than out there in the valley. So on this side, I don't think the effect is being felt yet as much as it is down there in the Rio Grande Valley, with the entire industries pretty much shutting down because of water concerns. And because the water is not flowing in from Mexico. I can tell you a lot about what's going on the Mexican side of the border in our region. What's going on is something that the former IBWC U.S. Commissioner Ms. Jenner addressed, and that is that there's some technical and management challenges on the Mexican side. Number one, over here, we in the U.S. we optimize our use of river water. We're constantly trying to improve our irrigation systems and water distribution. On the Mexican side, they're barely announcing some improvements to be made, some technical improvements they call them, in the next few years, so they can utilize their water in a more efficient way. Also, they're dealing with problems that we here in the U.S. don't really deal with, and that is, when is the last time that somebody dug a hole near the water reservoir or near the river and just extracted water for their own personal benefit? I haven't heard of a case in the U.S. In Mexico, just in the state of Chihuahua itself, we're hearing reports of up to 7,000 illegal wells.
Wow.
That's water being drained that's water being drained that could have been used not only to pay the U.S. water debt, some of it, but also to provide that water to residents in Mexico who need potable water for themselves. So it's quite a challenge, and the consensus is that there's no way that Mexico is going to be able to deliver the water it owes the U.S. by October 25th.
And Rudy,
I'm sorry.
Sorry, just to dovetail on what Julian was saying about climate change, it affects us here. South Texas, for those watching, it's really hot. We have triple-digit temperatures a majority of the year, and we also don't have the best way of distributing water. We have an open canal system, and sometimes up to 85% of that water will evaporate before it gets to its destination. So when I mention long-term solutions, we're trying to establish some here, desalination of seawater and others, underground piping of water. So the United States doesn't have that fully under control either.
Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback a little more on this, we're talking about the sugarcane industry because that was the biggest story that happened right here in the Rio Grande Valley over the last year, almost year and a half now. But there are so many other industries that depend on this water. We're thinking about cattle ranchers as well. And, that's something that impacts, as we said with the screwworm, if the price of beef goes up because, there's high demand and less supply because of something like screwworm, or in this case, we're talking about drought with not enough hay to feed those cattle, that's going to impact, your dinner table all across America, regardless of where you live, whether you're near the border or in the interior, in the Midwest, in Michigan, Iowa, Idaho, states like that. So definitely a big problem that could have big economic impacts down the road. So thank you very much, Sandra and Julian, for your reporting on that. We're going to continue just after the break with our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendiz, to talk about a new effort in Mexico to stop weapons from coming this way towards the border. Stay with us. Border Report Live is going to be back in about 1 minute. Welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mideles, your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas. Joining me once again on this program, we have our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendiz. Julian, fill us in on a little bit of the story that you've been working on.
Yes, Rudy. The story about U.S.-Mexico relationship is based in three broad topics, and one is trade. We see trade coming in. Commerce flowing through the international bridges and to the ports of entry every day. The other one, obviously, is immigration, which we report here on a lot. The third one would be what people on this side call border security. This has been pretty much a thorn in the side in the relationship for the longest time, especially since the rise of the transnational drug cartels back in the 1990s. So this Friday, we got some good news for a change in this very thorny topic. And that is that in McAllen, Texas, there was a high-level meeting of several U.S. and Mexican representatives who came up with an agreement to address one area that Mexico in particular has been pushing on for a while. And what the Mexicans are saying, look, for the longest time, you want us to stop the flow of to do something about the flow of migrants, to stop the flow of drugs into the U.S. But we also want you to stop the flow of weapons into Mexico. Mexico has a single firearms factory, and pretty much very few people have a permit to carry a gun. Yet, every year in Mexico, between 29,000 and 36,000 people are murdered, most of them with guns. So where do the guns come from? Most of them, the great majority, come from the United States. So what happened on Friday is that officials from both sides of the border got together and they came up with a plan to stem the flow of weapons from the U.S. to Mexico. We have word from the president of Mexico about this accord. I hope we can play it.
ICE, unmask. What are you afraid of?
Words from California.
Sorry, a slight technical difficulty there, but I'll get that up for you in just a moment.
Yeah, no problem, Rudy. The gist of the accord is that for the first time, Mexico is going to have access to some gun databases in the United States. It's not an open license to look at everybody's gun ownership record, but the two countries are going to build a secure platform where the Mexican government can request from the U.S. to go in and look for particular weapons that were used in Mexico to commit a crime. The Mexicans obviously are going to have the serial numbers. They're going to have the characteristics, the images of the bullets, so they can look in this database and try to figure out where the weapons originally were sold, where they came from, and how they could have possibly entered Mexico and ended up in the hands of the drug cartels. It's a pretty significant accord, and Mexico is really happy about it because, like I said, they always say, well, you're always asking us to do this for you when it comes to border security. Now we're asking you to do this. Now, how do the weapons get from the U.S. to Mexico? Most people who buy a gun, most gun owners are pretty law-abiding, but there's this phenomenon, especially in border states like California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, especially in South Texas, I might add, and it's called straw purchases, and that is some criminal in Mexico or the U.S. contacts an American citizen and gives them money so they can go and purchase a weapon at a gun store or buy it from a friend or whatever. And then when they accumulate sufficient guns, they place them on vehicles. It can be a passenger vehicle, or we've had some cases in which guns and ammunition were coming over from the U.S. to Mexico in passenger buses, in the luggage compartment of passenger buses. So the guns are gathered, they're sent over into Mexico, and here's where this accord is going to come into play. Southbound, what U.S. Customs and Border Protection calls southbound inspections, are relatively rare. That is, we inspect everybody who's coming from Mexico to the U.S., but rarely do we inspect the people who are leaving the U.S. and going into Mexico. This agreement calls for more screening, perhaps not daily screening, but at least some targeted screening of vehicles going into Mexico to make sure they are not carrying either weapons or narcotics. This also affects the national security of Mexico, because some of the weapons that are coming over are not your run-of-the-mill, 6-shooter pistols or even 9mm. There's been documented instances, multiple documented instances of 50 caliber sniper rifles coming into Mexico from the U.S., finding their way into the hands of drug cartels, and these weapons used to target Mexican law enforcement or the Mexican army. There was even an instance of a high caliber weapon that was used to down a Mexican army helicopter in the interior of Mexico. So this is a pretty significant development in the binational relationship when it comes to border security.
Now, I was going to ask because, we were talking about this the other day when it comes to drug smuggling. We were talking about the numbers with Mr. David Beer of the Cato Institute about such a high number of American citizens. And as you said, it's American citizens that are, less likely to be stopped, less likely to be inspected coming north of the border. But as you just said, going south of the border, there's rarely any of these stops. How crucial is that going to be for folks? I mean, we'll use the checkpoint, for example. If you want to leave the Rio Grande Valley at about the 100th 100-mile mark from our border with Mexico, you have to stop through a checkpoint, a border patrol checkpoint. But if you're coming this way, back down south, you're just free to cruise 75 miles an hour, which is the speed limit on the expressway there. So how critical is it going to be trying to stop this? And do you foresee any kind of maybe complaints from, Americans who have been, or people who live on this side of the border that have ties to Mexico and cross often, having just another kind of stop along the way?
What everybody's saying is that it's going to be critical that there are more inspections for people leaving the U.S. and coming into Mexico. However, it's not going to be feasible to inspect every single vehicle or talk to every single person like it is when people are coming from Mexico to the U.S. And you would get the same result, which is lines, stretching a quarter of a mile, half a mile, in waits of 2-3 hours to get across. So they're going to have to use a lot of technology, a lot of intelligence. And this agreement that was signed, that they came to turn the corner Friday in McAllen, calls for a lot of cooperation, a lot of intelligence sharing on both sides of the border. So maybe this can be more of a targeted approach as opposed to inspecting everybody who's leaving the country, because that's not going to be feasible. Mm-hmm. It's going to affect commerce. It's going to make people angry who are just going to see their mom, their grandma across the border.
It's interesting you mentioned there, a lot of sharing of intelligence between the two countries. We know that in the past, Mexico really, really cares about their sovereignty. Nobody wants to look like they're a puppet for the United States in a very proud country like that. Has there been any talk about any sovereignty issues amongst people about under this new accord?
Well, yeah, as a matter of fact, the president of Mexico addressed this accord on Saturday when she made a stop in Mazatlan, in the Pacific resort Mexican town of Mazatlan. Mm-hmm. She emphasized, we might even have the image from that speech. She emphasized, quote, they are going to do this on their soil. They are going to do this not in Mexico, but in the U.S. So definitely she is very watchful of telling Mexicans, no, we're not compromising our independence. We're not being subservient to the U.S. This is for the benefit of Mexico, and this is something that the U.S. is going to do and that we wish they would have done a long time ago.
Now, I do have to ask, because if you cross into Mexico, as people know, you can get stopped for a secondary inspection by their customs services, just like you can coming back. Was there any talk about maybe an increased inspection rate for cars coming from north of the border to support this on their side as well?
Not yet, Rudy. This was the first meeting last Friday of this new working binational group of officials. Mm-hmm. So they have not gotten down to the details. But now that you mention it, I will have to mention that unlike in the U.S., where if you have a permit, you can carry a concealed weapon. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of states where you can openly carry a gun. Mm-hmm. They're called open carry states. In Mexico, no, you cannot carry a gun. And the penalties are very severe. It's not an infraction. It's not a fine. You go straight to jail, and it's going to be very difficult and very expensive to get out of that charge, even if it was accidental. Mm-hmm. Even if you just had your hunting rifle in your truck or your concealed weapon, and you just happen to go visit a relative in Mexico.
Yeah, we've heard stories of that over here in Brownsville, going over to Matamoros. So there's big signs when you get to Gateway International Bridge in downtown Brownsville. It's a check your car for firearms and ammunition, because they do not play if you get caught with that over the border. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
The signs say penalty, prison.
Yes, sir. Yes, they do. Well, thank you so much for your reporting today, Julian. We appreciate it. Julian Resendez, our El Paso correspondent. Stay with us, because Border Report Live is back in 1 minute. Welcome back to this episode of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mideles, your host here in Harlingen, Texas. Got a new poll to tell you about, a little data time with Rudy, if you will. A new poll shows a plurality of Americans oppose President Trump's National Guard deployment to cities like D.C. and Los Angeles. So an NPR Ipsos poll that was published over the weekend found that 49% of people oppose the deployment of National Guard troops to a major city. And on your screen, as you can see the numbers there, 38% said they would support the move, and 12% say they are unsure. Now, in another question, 50% of participants said that they oppose efforts allowing federal officers to make immigration-related stops with fewer restrictions. 35% said they support the measure, and 13% said they were unsure of how to feel about the topic. These findings come after President Trump sent soldiers to Los Angeles over the summer to quell immigration protests, and since then, Trump has sent troops to Washington, D.C., Chicago, and as we said at the top of the program, we've also mentioned now Memphis and Portland are the next targets for the president's immigration crackdown. And real quick, before we go, talking about data, we wanted to remind you about our friends over at Political Power Ranker. If you didn't know, Political Power Ranker is a weekly show tracking the movers, shakers, and rule makers in American politics using data. So make sure to check it out. You can find more on Political Power Ranker at abc27.com or your local Nexstar station's website. And that is going to do it for today's episode. On behalf of Sandra Sanchez, South Texas correspondent, El Paso correspondent Julian Resendez, my name is Rudy Mideles. Have a great day.